The fluorescent lights in the delivery room hummed with a frequency that matched my mounting contractions. Each pulse of pain radiated from my lower back through my entire body, a reminder that I'd spent 9 months running from a truth that was about to arrive whether I was ready or not. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with my own sweat as I gripped the bed rail, my knuckles going pale under the strain. Breathe, Jazz. You got this, girl. Keisha's voice cut through the fog of pain, her hand cool against my forehead. My best friend since undergrad had been the only person I'd told when the pregnancy test came back positive, 2 weeks after signing the divorce papers. She'd held me while I sobbed in her apartment, both of us understanding what this meant. That I'd fled from Daniel Park before either of us could acknowledge what had been building between us during that strange year of marriage. The contraction peaked, and I couldn't stop the low moan that escaped my lips. The nurse, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, checked the monitor beside my bed. You're at 8 centimeters, honey. Not long now. 8 centimeters away from meeting my daughter. 8 centimeters from a choice I couldn't unmake. I'd thought about calling him 1,000 times during this pregnancy. Had drafted texts I never sent, rehearsed conversations that would never happen. Daniel Park, heir to the most powerful Korean organized crime family in Los Angeles, my ex-husband of exactly 9 months, didn't know he was about to become a father. Let me get a picture. Keisha pulled out her phone, her face bright with excitement that I couldn't quite match. Girl, Hannah is about to make her debut. We need to document this. Keisha, not now. But she was already snapping photos, the flash making me squint between contractions. My hospital gown was soaked with sweat, my natural hair pulled back in a hasty bun that had started to unravel hours ago. I must have looked like hell, but Keisha was grinning like this was the Oscars. Just one more. Oh, this one's perfect. Your face looks so determined and beautiful. She tapped her screen, probably adding some filter. Then I watched her expression shift from joy to confusion to absolute horror. Oh no, oh shit. Jasmine, What? I demanded, but another contraction cut off my words. This one was different, deeper, more urgent. The nurse moved quickly to position my legs. I sent the photo to the wrong number. Keisha's voice was barely a whisper. I was texting you and him earlier about. I got the threads mixed up and Who did you send it to? But I already knew. The way my heart had started hammering had nothing to do with the labor, and everything to do with the only person whose name could make my entire body tense with equal parts longing and terror. Daniel. She showed me her phone with a shaking hand. There was the photo. Me, vulnerable and exhausted, clearly in a hospital bed. And above it, 3 words she'd typed before attaching the image. She's coming now. The contraction intensified, and I couldn't focus on anything except the overwhelming need to push. The nurse was saying something about breathing, about waiting, but my body had its own agenda. This baby was coming whether I was ready or not, whether Daniel knew or not, whether I'd spent 9 months trying to convince myself I could do this alone or not. I need to push, I gasped, and the nurse nodded, her professional mask firmly in place. On the next contraction, I want you to bear down and push for 10 seconds. Can you do that for me? I nodded, gathering what little strength I had left. The physical pain was manageable. I'd built my career on enduring hostile cross-examinations and marathon negotiations. But the emotional pain of knowing that in approximately 20 minutes, Daniel would burst through those doors was something else entirely. We'd met 2 years ago at a charity gala for the Korean American Bar Association. I'd been there networking, trying to make partner at my firm. He'd been there for reasons I didn't fully understand until later, maintaining the family's legitimate facade while running an empire built on carefully controlled chaos. He'd approached me at the dessert table, his English flawless, but accented in a way that made every word sound deliberate, considered. The panna cotta is better than the creme brulee, he'd said, not as an opinion but as a fact. I'd looked up into eyes so dark they were almost black, set in a face that belonged on magazine covers except for the slight scar along his jawline that suggested a history more complicated than modeling contracts. "I prefer making my own decisions, thank you." He'd smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of those devastating eyes. "So do I. Daniel Park." Jasmine Reed. I'd taken his offered hand, noting the watch that could fund a year of depositions, the tailored suit cut with precision that spoke of custom measurements and international fabric, the confidence of someone who'd never had a motion denied in court. "Push." The nurse's command brought me back to the present. I bore down with everything I had, feeling my daughter move through me, feeling the world shift on its axis. "Good. I can see the head." One more like that on the next contraction. Keisha was crying now, still holding her phone like it was evidence in a crime scene. Which, in a way, it was. Evidence of my secret, my daughter, my failed attempt to protect both of us from a world I'd never fully understood. "Jazz, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I'll call him and explain that it was a mistake, that it's too late." I gasped as another contraction built. "He's probably already on his way." Daniel Park wasn't the kind of man who ignored a text message with a photo of his ex-wife in labor. He was the kind of man who moved chess pieces across the city with a phone call, who could clear traffic and close hospitals and make people disappear. He was the kind of man I'd married in a civil ceremony, attended by his grandmother and my mother, neither of whom spoke the other's language, but who both cried anyway. Our marriage had been a transaction. My mother needed medical bills paid. Stage 3 breast cancer doesn't respect a public defender's salary. His grandmother needed to see him settled before she died. Needed the promise of great-grandchildren to ease her passage from this world. He'd approached me 3 months after we met, laying out the terms like a corporate merger. 1 year of marriage, no expectation of consummation, generous compensation for my participation, divorce papers filed the day after his grandmother's funeral. I'd said yes because I was desperate, and because some part of me had been curious about what it would be like to live in his world, even temporarily. To see behind the curtain of power and money and influence that ran parallel to the legal system I'd devoted my life to serving. "Push!" I pushed, feeling my daughter crown, feeling everything change. "That's it. Heads out. One more, Jasmine. Give me one more good push." The final contraction built like a wave, pulling me under. I pushed with everything. All my fear, all my anger, all my love for this child I'd carried alone for 9 months. And then she was there, screaming and perfect, being placed on my chest while the nurse worked to clamp the cord. "It's a girl," the doctor announced unnecessarily. "Healthy and strong." "Hana," I whispered, using the Korean name I'd chosen in secret, a gift to a father who didn't know she existed. In Korean, it meant one or first, the first of what I'd once imagined might be many. "Her name is Hana." "It's beautiful," Keisha sobbed, squeezing my shoulder. The door to the delivery room slammed open with enough force to rattle the equipment. I didn't need to look up to know who had arrived. I could feel his presence like a change in air pressure, like a storm rolling in off the Pacific. "Where is she?" Daniel's voice cut through the room, rough with something I'd never heard from him before. Not during our 12 months of careful politeness, not during the signing of the divorce papers. This was raw, unfiltered emotion from a man who'd built his reputation on absolute control. I looked up, meeting his eyes across the delivery room. He was in a suit, charcoal Armani that he wore like armor. His hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. His face was a mask of fury and fear and something else I couldn't name. Behind him stood 2 of his men, both Korean, both clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment, but unwilling to leave their boss unprotected. "Sir, you can't be in here," the nurse started, but Daniel's gaze never left mine. "I'm her husband." Ex-husband, I corrected weakly, my arms tightening protectively around Hana. He moved toward me with the deliberate steps of a predator, and I watched his eyes take in everything. The hospital gown, my exhausted face, the tiny bundle in my arms. When his gaze landed on Hana, something in his expression cracked completely. Is she... His voice broke. He cleared his throat, starting again, each word careful, as if he were negotiating the most important contract of his life. Is she mine? The question hung in the sterile air between us, weighted with 9 months of silence and secrets, with a year of marriage that had been more complicated than either of us had admitted. I looked down at Hana, at her tiny fists and perfect face, at the evidence I'd been carrying that our transaction had created something neither of us had planned for. Yes, I whispered. She's yours. Daniel didn't move for what felt like an eternity. He just stood there, staring at Hana with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Something raw and unguarded that made my chest tighten. Behind him, his men shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of protocol for their boss meeting his secret daughter for the first time. Everyone out, Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. Now. The nurse opened her mouth to protest, but something in his eyes made her reconsider. She glanced at me, and I nodded weakly. Within seconds, the room had cleared except for Keisha, who was still rooted to her spot by my bedside, phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. You too, Daniel said, finally tearing his gaze from Hana to look at my best friend. I'm not leaving her alone with you, Keisha said, lifting her chin in defiance. I'd always loved that about her. She'd stare down a judge, a cop, or apparently a Korean mob boss without flinching. Keish, it's okay, I said softly, exhaustion making my voice thin. Give us a minute. She squeezed my hand once, hard, then leaned down to whisper in my ear. I'll be right outside. You scream, and I'm calling every cop in LA County. Loud enough for Daniel to hear, she added, I don't care who you know. After she left, the silence in the room was suffocating. Daniel took another step closer, his eyes fixed on Hana. Can I... He cleared his throat. May I hold her? The question surprised me. The Daniel I'd known during our marriage had been controlled, distant, polite. He'd never asked permission for anything. He'd simply stated what would happen, and it did. This hesitance, this vulnerability, was new. I nodded, adjusting Hana in my arms before carefully transferring her to him. I watched as he cradled her with surprising gentleness, his large hands supporting her tiny head, with the kind of care usually reserved for handling ancient artifacts. Something in my chest cracked watching him. This dangerous man holding our daughter like she was made of glass. Hana, he said softly, testing the name. You gave her a Korean name. I thought... My voice caught. I thought she should have something from your side of her family, even if she never knew them. His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. When he looked up at me, his eyes were dark with fury barely held in check. You were going to keep her from me completely. You signed divorce papers, I shot back, finding some of my courtroom steel despite the exhaustion. You made it very clear our arrangement was over. What was I supposed to do? Show up at your door with a positive pregnancy test and demand you honor a contract that had already expired? Yes! The word exploded from him, making Hana startle in his arms. He immediately gentled his voice, rocking her slightly. Yes, Jasmine. That's exactly what you should have done. She's my daughter. She's my daughter, I corrected. I'm the one who's been carrying her for 9 months. I'm the one who's been going to every appointment alone, making every decision alone, terrified about how I was going to afford daycare and diapers on a public defender's salary. You were just the sperm donor in a business arrangement that ended. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Is that what you think our marriage was? Just business? I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. That's what you told me it would be. 1 year, no strings, divorce papers signed the day after Halmoni's funeral. Those were your terms, Daniel. I didn't make them up. He looked down at Hannah, his expression softening in a way that made my heart ache. Things changed. Did they? I challenged. Because from where I was sitting, we lived in the same house for 12 months and barely spoke to each other. You left before I woke up most mornings and came home after I was asleep. The only time we had actual conversations was when your grandmother was around, and we had to play the happy couple. I was trying to protect you, he said, his voice low and intense. From my world, from the things I do, from the people who would have used you to get to me. I thought distance would keep you safe. Well, congratulations. You kept me so safe that I left thinking you couldn't wait to be rid of me. I blinked back tears that I told myself were just postpartum hormones. And then I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the divorce was final, and I realized I'd been stupid enough to fall for someone who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me want to look away. What did you just say? Nothing, I said quickly, realizing my mistake. I'm exhausted and hormonal, and I don't know what I'm saying. You said you fell for me. He took a step closer, Hannah still cradled carefully in his arms. When? During the marriage? I turned my face away, focusing on the monitor that was still tracking my vitals, even though the delivery was over. It doesn't matter now. That was then. This is different. Look at me, Jasmine. When I didn't comply, his voice dropped to that particular tone that had always made my stomach flip during our marriage. Not quite a command, but close. Please. I forced myself to meet his gaze, hating how vulnerable I felt in this hospital bed, still in my gown, while he stood there in his perfect suit, holding our daughter like he had every right. I looked for you, he said quietly. After the divorce, I gave you 2 weeks to settle, like we'd agreed. And then I came to find you and you were gone. Your apartment was empty. Your firm said you'd quit. Even your mother wouldn't tell me where you'd gone. My mother knew better than to give my location to someone in your line of work, I said flatly. She might not speak Korean, but she understood enough about your family business to know I was safer hidden. From me? The pain in his voice sounded genuine. You thought you needed protection from me. From your world, I corrected. From the violence and the danger and the constant threat of someone using me to hurt you. You said it yourself. Distance keeps people safe. So I made it permanent. There's nothing permanent about us, Jasmine. Not anymore. He looked down at Hannah. She makes sure of that. You can't run now. I won't let you. The possessiveness in his tone should have made me angry, but instead it sent a shiver down my spine that was equal parts fear and something I didn't want to examine too closely. You can't just decide that, Daniel. I have rights. She's my daughter. Our daughter, he corrected, his voice hardening. And I've already missed 9 months of her life because you decided I didn't deserve to know she existed. That ends now. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. I need to make a call. I'll be right back. He carefully transferred Hannah back to my arms, his fingers brushing mine in the exchange. The contact sent electricity through me that I definitely blamed on hormones. He stepped into the hallway, and I could hear his voice through the door. Rapid Korean that I couldn't follow but recognized as his business tone. Cold, clipped, final. Making decisions that probably affected people's lives, or livelihoods, or worse. Keisha slipped back in the moment he left, her eyes wide. Girl, what the hell just happened? Are you okay? Is he threatening you? I don't know, I admitted. He says he looked for me after the divorce. He says he wants to be part of Hannah's life. And you believe him? She sat on the edge of my bed, taking my free hand. "Jazz, this is Daniel Park. The Daniel Park. The man whose family runs half the illegal activity in LA. You really think he's going to be content with visitation rights and child support checks?" "I know who he is, Quiche." I looked down at Hannah, who was sleeping peacefully against my chest, but he's also her father. What am I supposed to do? Keep her from him forever? Run every time he gets close? If that's what it takes to keep both of you safe, then yes. Her voice was fierce. You didn't leave him just because the contract was over. You left because you realized what his world would do to you, to any children you might have. Don't let one moment of him holding a baby erase all the reasons you ran in the first place. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd left Daniel not just because our arrangement had ended, but because I'd started to feel things that scared me more than his connections or his violence. I'd started to imagine a real life with him, had caught myself watching him sleep on the rare nights he came home early, had memorized the way he took his coffee and the small scar on his ribcage from a knife fight when he was 16. I'd been falling in love with a man whose hands were stained with blood, whose phone calls ended with people disappearing, whose family business was built on fear and loyalty enforced through violence. And when his grandmother died and he'd handed me divorce papers without a flicker of emotion, I'd realized how foolish I'd been to confuse a business arrangement with something real. But then I'd seen those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, and everything had changed. Suddenly, it wasn't just about protecting my own heart. It was about protecting my daughter from a world I'd barely glimpsed during our marriage, a world that Daniel inhabited as naturally as breathing. Daniel returned, his expression grim. "We need to move you to a private facility." "Excuse me?" I stared at him. "I just gave birth. I'm not going anywhere." "This hospital isn't secure enough," he said, already pulling out his phone again. "I'm having you transferred to—" "No." I cut him off, my courtroom voice returning in full force. "I chose this hospital. My doctor is here. My insurance covers this hospital. You don't get to swoop in and start making decisions about my medical care." His jaw tightened. "Our daughter is a park. There are people who would hurt her to get to me. This hospital has security that could be breached by a determined teenager. And whose fault is that?" I shot back. "Whose choices created those enemies? Not mine. I'm a public defender, Daniel. The only people who want to hurt me are defendants who lost their cases, and they're all already in prison." "Jasmine." He moved closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that meant he was serious. "I am trying to protect you, both of you. There are things in motion that you don't understand." "Then explain them to me," I demanded. "Stop treating me like I'm fragile or stupid or someone who needs to be managed. I was your wife for a year. I know more about your world than you ever wanted me to." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "Fine. You want the truth? Someone leaked information about our marriage, about the divorce, and now there are people who will see you and Hannah as leverage against me, as weaknesses to be exploited." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "Who leaked it?" "I'm working on finding out." His expression was carved from stone. "But until I do, you're both vulnerable. So you have 2 choices. Let me move you to a secure location where I can protect you properly, or stay here and put our daughter at risk because you're too stubborn to accept help." I hated him in that moment. Hated that he was right. That he'd walked back into my life and immediately made it more complicated and dangerous. Hated that some part of me, the part that had fallen for him during our marriage, wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that his concern was about more than just protecting his heir. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "But I choose the facility, and my doctor comes with me, and Keisha stays with me. Those are my terms." Daniel's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. Still negotiating like a lawyer even in a hospital bed. Some things don't change. He pulled out his phone. "Give me the names. I'll make it happen." As he stepped away to make arrangements, Keisha leaned close. "What are you doing, Jazz? This is exactly what I was warning you about." Now he's moving you somewhere isolated where he has complete control." "I know," I whispered back. "But he's right about one thing. If someone knows about our connection, and Hana, we're sitting ducks here. At least if he's moving us somewhere secure, I can buy time to figure out my next move." "Your next move better be calling a lawyer," Keisha muttered. "One who specializes in custody battles with organized crime families." I didn't respond, because Daniel was returning with that look on his face that meant things were already in motion, decisions already made, my life once again being rearranged by forces I couldn't control. "It's done," he said. "The transfer will happen in 2 hours. My doctor will meet us there. He's one of the best neonatalists in the state. Your doctor can consult remotely if you prefer, but I'd rather have someone I trust overseeing Hana's care." "Someone you trust," I repeated. "Meaning someone who's loyal to you first and his medical oath second?" "I'm meaning someone who understands that confidentiality isn't optional," Daniel corrected coldly. "Someone who won't leak to the press or to my enemies that I have a newborn daughter. Your regular pediatrician might be perfectly competent, but can you guarantee their discretion?" I couldn't, and we both knew it. This was Daniel's world, where loyalty was currency and trust was earned through blood or fear. I'd thought I could escape it by leaving, but apparently I'd only delayed the inevitable. 2 hours, I agreed. "But Daniel, this doesn't mean anything between us. This is just about keeping Hana safe. Once whatever threat you're worried about is handled, I'm taking my daughter and we're leaving. You can have visitation rights, but I won't raise her in your world." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "We'll see," he said finally, and something about those 2 words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Because I'd learned during our marriage that when Daniel Park said, "We'll see," what he really meant was, "I've already decided, and you'll come around to my way eventually." I just had to make sure that this time, eventually, never came. The secure facility turned out to be a private medical wing in a building I hadn't known existed, 20 floors above street level in downtown LA, accessible only through a private elevator that required both a key card and biometric scan. The room they'd given us looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital, with cream-colored walls, actual artwork, and windows that overlooked the city with bulletproof glass, so thick I could barely hear the traffic below. "This is insane," Keisha muttered, running her fingers along the marble bathroom counter. "There's a soaking tub in here. Who puts a soaking tub in a hospital room?" "Someone with too much money and too many enemies," I said, adjusting Hana in my arms. She'd been sleeping peacefully through the transfer, blissfully unaware that her first few hours of life had been more dramatic than most people's entire childhoods. Dr. Kim, Daniel's neonatalist, had examined Hana thoroughly and declared her perfect. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes and careful hands, and he'd spoken to me with the kind of respectful attention that made it clear Daniel had briefed him extensively on treating me as more than just an incubator for his boss's child. It should have made me feel better, but instead it just reminded me of how much control Daniel already had over this situation. A knock at the door made us both tense. Keisha moved to answer it, but Daniel walked in before she could reach it, using a key card I hadn't known he had. Of course he had access. This was probably his building. "How is she?" he asked, his eyes immediately finding Hana. "Perfect," I said, hearing the defensive edge in my voice. No thanks to being dragged across the city 2 hours after being born. "Dr. Kim said the transfer was medically sound," Daniel replied, moving closer. He'd changed since the hospital, now wearing black slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that I definitely shouldn't have been noticing. "And you're both safer here than you would have been." "Safe from what, exactly?" I challenged. "You keep talking about threats and enemies, but you haven't actually explained what we're supposedly in danger from." Daniel glanced at Keisha, then back to me. "Can we speak privately?" Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Keisha, I said firmly. She's not leaving. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. Do you remember Kim Jae-sung? The name sent ice through my veins. I'd only met him once, at a dinner party during our marriage. A man in his 60s with cold eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Daniel had been unusually tense that entire evening, and he'd refused to explain why afterward, just told me to stay away from Kim if I ever saw him again. Your father's old business partner, I said carefully. The one who went to prison for racketeering. The one who got out 6 months ago, Daniel corrected, and who blames my family for his conviction. He's been making moves, trying to reclaim territory my father took over while he was inside. When he found out about our divorce, he saw an opportunity. Opportunity for what? To hurt me. Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knows that ex-wives can be useful, either as leverage or as sources of information about business dealings they might have overheard during the marriage. My stomach clenched. I don't know anything about your business. I made sure of that. I know, he said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. You were very careful not to see or hear anything during our marriage. It's one of the reasons He cut himself off, his expression shuddering. It's why I knew you'd be safe once the arrangement ended. But Kim doesn't know that. And now that he's learned about Hana, you're both targets. How did he find out? Keisha demanded. You said someone leaked the information. Who? Daniel's expression darkened. I'm still determining that. But whoever it was, they knew details that only a few people had access to. The divorce date, Jasmine's new address, the hospital where she was registered for delivery. The implications of that made my blood run cold. You think someone in your organization betrayed you? I know they did, he said grimly. The question is who and why. Until I find them, I can't guarantee your safety outside this building. I looked down at Hana, at her tiny perfect face, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on me. I'd thought I was protecting her by leaving Daniel, by building a life separate from his world. Instead, I'd just made us both more vulnerable. How long? I asked quietly. How long do we have to stay here? Until I've eliminated the threat. At my sharp look, he added, eliminated the threat, not the person. Kim Jae-sung is a problem I can handle through legal means. I've been building a case with the FBI for months, but his people are more unpredictable, and until I know who's loyal to him in my own organization, I need you where I can protect you. This isn't protection, I said, my voice rising. This is a cage, a really nice cage, but still a cage. You're essentially holding us prisoner until you clean up your own mess. I'm keeping you alive. Daniel shot back, his control finally cracking. Do you have any idea what these people would do if they got their hands on you? On Hana? They don't just kill, Jasmine. They make examples. They make people suffer to send messages. The raw fear in his voice shocked me into silence. During our marriage, I'd seen Daniel angry, seen him coldly furious, seen him professionally intimidating, but I'd never seen him genuinely afraid. Tell me about Kim, I said, switching into lawyer mode. Everything. If I'm going to be stuck here, I want to know exactly what kind of threat we're dealing with. Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He pulled up a chair, settling into it with the kind of weariness that suggested he hadn't slept in days. Kim Jae-sung came to LA from Busan in the 80s. He and my father built the organization together. My father handled the Korean community connections. Kim handled the muscle and enforcement. They were partners for 20 years. What changed? My father wanted to go legitimate, or at least more legitimate. He saw the way the winds were blowing. Federal racketeering laws getting tougher, local law enforcement getting less cooperative. He started investing in legal businesses, using them to launder the illegal money, planning a long-term transition. Kim saw it as weakness. I could see where this was going. Your father pushed him out. More complicated than that. Kim got greedy, started taking risks my father didn't approve of. Drugs, not just marijuana or pills, but heroin, human trafficking. Things that bring federal attention and destroy the community we're supposed to protect. My father gave him an ultimatum: stop or leave. Kim refused both options. So your father had him arrested, I guessed. My father made sure that when the FBI finally built their case against our organization, Kim took the fall alone. Daniel's expression was unreadable. Every piece of evidence pointed to him. Every witness testified against him. My father walked away clean and took over Kim's operations. And now Kim's out and wants revenge. I looked down at Hannah, my protective instincts warring with my legal training. But going after your ex-wife and newborn daughter? That's not just revenge. That's trying to destroy you emotionally. Yes. The single word carried so much weight. Which is why I need you to understand that this isn't about control, Jasmine. This is about survival. Mine, yours, Hannah's. Keisha had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke up. So what's your plan? Keep them locked up here forever? Eventually, Jasmine has to go back to work. Hannah has to have a life. You can't just freeze time until this Kim guy dies of old age. The FBI raid on Kim's operation happens in 3 weeks, Daniel said. They've been building the case since he got out, and I've been assisting. Once he's back in prison, his people will scatter. The threat will be neutralized. 3 weeks, I repeated. You want us to stay here for 3 weeks. At minimum, possibly longer depending on how his people react. I laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. I have a job, Daniel. I have cases. I have a life that doesn't revolve around your criminal empire. I've already spoken to your supervisor at the public defender's office, Daniel said calmly. You're on extended maternity leave. Paid. The casual way he'd rearranged my life made fury burn in my chest. You had no right. I had every right as Hannah's father to ensure her mother could take proper leave to care for her, he interrupted. Your supervisor was very understanding when I explained the situation. What situation? What did you tell him? That you'd had complications during delivery and needed extended recovery time, which isn't entirely untrue. Giving birth is complicated, and you do need recovery time. His expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to destroy your career, Jasmine. I'm trying to make sure you have a career to go back to instead of attending your own funeral. The brutal honesty of that statement shut down my arguments. He was right. If Kim's people got to us, there wouldn't be a career to protect. There wouldn't be anything. Okay, I said finally. 3 weeks. But I have conditions. Daniel's mouth curved slightly. Of course you do. First, Keisha stays with me. Full access, no restrictions. Second, I want daily updates on your investigation. Real updates, not sanitized versions. Third, after 3 weeks, if the threat isn't resolved, we renegotiate. I'm not signing up for indefinite imprisonment, no matter how nice the accommodations. Agreed to all 3. He stood, moving to the window. There's something else we need to discuss. My stomach tightened. What? Hannah needs to be registered. Birth certificate, social security number. And under the circumstances, I think it's best if she has my last name. For protection. Absolutely not, I said immediately. Her last name is Reed. Like mine. If her last name is Reed, there's no legal connection between her and me. Which means, if something happens to you, I have no automatic custody rights. She'd go into the foster system while the courts sorted it out. The thought of Hannah in foster care, even temporarily, made me feel sick. But giving her Daniel's last name felt like giving up some essential piece of her identity, like admitting that she belonged to his world rather than mine. Hyphenate it, Keisha suggested suddenly. Reed Park. She gets both names, both identities, and legally, you both have equal claim. Daniel considered this, then nodded. That's acceptable. Fine, I agreed reluctantly. Hannah Reed Park, but she goes by Reed in everyday life. We can discuss that when everyday life resumes, Daniel said, which wasn't exactly agreement, but also wasn't worth fighting about right now. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. I know you don't trust me, Jasmine. I know you think this is just about control or possession or protecting my interests. But you need to understand something. During our marriage, I told myself I was keeping distance to protect you. That if you didn't see too much, know too much, you could walk away clean when the arrangement ended. That's what happened, I pointed out. I walked away. No, he said quietly, turning to look at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. You ran, because I was too afraid to admit that somewhere during those 12 months, our arrangement stopped being business for me. And by the time I realized it, by the time I went looking for you to tell you the truth, you were gone. The room seemed to tilt. Daniel, I spent 9 months trying to find you, he continued, his voice rough. Not because of business or obligation or protecting my interests. Because I couldn't sleep without knowing you were safe. Because I kept seeing you in every courtroom, every restaurant, every crowded street. Because I'd convinced myself I could let you go when the contract ended, and I was wrong. Keisha was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the rushing sound in my ears. You don't mean that, I whispered. You're just saying it because of Hannah. Because now you're stuck with me. I mean it because it's true. He opened the door, not looking back. 3 weeks, Jasmine. That's all I'm asking. 3 weeks to keep you safe, and to prove that what we had was more than a transaction. After that, if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. But I won't let you go without knowing the whole truth first. He left, the door closing softly behind him, and I was left staring at the space where he'd been, Hannah warm in my arms and my entire understanding of our marriage crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. Did he just... Keisha started. Yeah, I said faintly. I think he did. Shit, she breathed. What are you going to do? I looked down at Hannah, at the daughter I'd created with a man I'd thought I was running from, and realized I didn't have the slightest idea. Let me adjust the ending. I mean it because it's true. He opened the door. 3 weeks, Jasmine. 3 weeks to keep you safe and prove what we had was more than a transaction. After that, if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. But I won't let you go without knowing the truth first. He left, the door closing softly, and I stared at the space where he'd been. Hannah warm in my arms, and my entire understanding of our marriage crumbling. Did he just... Keisha started. Yeah, I said faintly. I think he did. Shit. What are you going to do? I looked down at Hannah, at the daughter I'd created with a man I'd thought I was running from, and realized I didn't have the slightest idea. The first week in the secure facility passed in a blur of newborn care and mounting tension. Hannah had her days and nights reversed, which meant I spent most of my time in a sleep-deprived fog while Keisha ran interference between me and the steady stream of people Daniel sent to check on us. Doctors, nurses, security personnel who all treated me with careful respect that couldn't quite hide the fact that I was essentially under house arrest. Daniel himself came every evening around 7, still in his work clothes, smelling of expensive cologne and the city. He'd hold Hannah while I showered or ate or simply sat in silence, watching him with our daughter and trying to reconcile this gentle father with the man who ran a criminal empire with brutal efficiency. We didn't talk about his confession. He didn't bring it up, and I was too afraid of what I might say if he did. Because the truth was, some part of me wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that our marriage had been more than a transaction, that the connection I'd felt hadn't been one-sided delusion. On the 8th day, everything changed. I was nursing Hannah in the comfortable chair by the window when raised voices erupted in the hallway outside my room. I recognized Daniel's voice immediately, cold and controlled in a way that made my skin prickle. The other voice was older, rougher, speaking rapid Korean that I couldn't follow. The door opened and Daniel entered, followed by an older Korean man in his 60s who I didn't recognize. But the way Daniel was positioned, slightly in front of the other man, body angled protectively toward me, told me everything I needed to know about the power dynamic. Jasmine, this is my father. Kim Min-ho. Daniel's voice was carefully neutral. He wanted to meet you and Hannah. I instinctively pulled Hannah closer, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable I was. Nursing, in comfortable clothes rather than armor, no lawyer between me and the man who had built the organization Daniel now ran. Mr. Kim, I said carefully, using the formal address. I wasn't aware Daniel had told you about us. The older man's eyes, so like his son's but colder, swept over me with an assessment that made me feel like evidence being evaluated. He didn't. I have my own sources. He glanced at Daniel. We will speak in Korean. No, Daniel said flatly. English or leave. Father and son stared at each other in a silent battle of wills that crackled with tension. Finally, the older man nodded curtly. She is pretty, he said, his English heavily accented but clear. Not Korean. This is problem. It's not a problem, Daniel replied, his voice dangerously quiet. And you'll speak about Jasmine with respect, or this conversation ends now. I watched the older man's eyes narrow, calculating. You hide her here. You keep secret. This means you are ashamed, yes? This means I'm protecting them, Daniel corrected. From Kim Jae-sung and from anyone else who might use them to hurt me, including people in our own organization who might question my judgment. The implication wasn't subtle. I realized with growing unease that this wasn't just a grandfather meeting his grandchild. This was a power play, a test of some kind that I didn't fully understand the rules of. Let me see, baby, Min-ho said, moving toward me. I glanced at Daniel, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Reluctantly, I adjusted Hannah so she was visible, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. Something shifted in the older man's expression, a softening so brief I might have imagined it. She has our blood, this I see. He looked back at Daniel. You will marry her again. That's Jasmine's decision, Daniel said. Not yours, not mine until she's ready. Is business decision, Min-ho countered. Child needs legitimate parents. She needs proper Korean name ceremony. She needs to be safe, I interrupted, finding my voice. Both men turned to stare at me, and I forced myself to meet Min-ho's gaze directly. With all due respect, Mr. Kim, Hannah doesn't need any ceremony or legitimization. What she needs is to grow up without targets on her back because of who her father is. Min-ho's expression was unreadable. You speak bold for woman who was paid to marry my son. The words were designed to wound, and they did. But I'd spent years in courtrooms facing down hostile witnesses. I knew how to take a hit and keep standing. I speak honest as a mother protecting her child, I corrected. Daniel and I had an arrangement, yes. That arrangement ended. What happens now is between us, not subject to negotiation with his family or his business associates. You think you have power here? Min-ho's voice was soft, dangerous. You think because you have his child, you can make demands? Father, Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. Enough. She needs to understand her position. The older man continued in Korean, apparently forgetting his son's earlier insistence on English. Daniel responded in the same language, his tone harsh enough that I didn't need translation to understand he was drawing a line. The argument escalated quickly, both men speaking too fast for me to catch even familiar words, until finally Minho turned and walked out without another word to me. The silence after he left was deafening. Daniel stood with his back to me, shoulders tight with tension, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said finally, still not turning around. He shouldn't have come here. I told him to stay away until things were more settled. "He's your father," I said quietly. "He has a right to meet his granddaughter. Not like that. Not treating you like you're some..." He cut himself off, finally turning to face me. "During our marriage, I kept you separate from my family as much as possible. You met my grandmother because that was part of the arrangement, but I kept you away from my father, from the rest of the organization. Do you know why?" I shook my head, still cradling Hana protectively. "Because I knew how they'd see you. As a transaction. As something I'd purchased for a specific purpose. And I couldn't..." His voice roughened. "I couldn't stand the thought of them treating you that way. Of you seeing yourself that way. Is that why you were never home?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Why you avoided me during our marriage? Because you didn't want me to see how your family viewed me?" "Partly." He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed near my chair. "And partly because every time I came home and saw you there, cooking dinner or reading on the couch or just existing in my space, it got harder to remember that it was temporary, that you were there because I'd hired you, not because you'd chosen me." My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Daniel, I know I made mistakes during our marriage," he continued. "I thought distance would protect both of us. You from my world, me from getting attached to something I knew I'd have to let go. But all it did was make me fall harder while convincing you I didn't care at all. You handed me divorce papers the day after your grandmother's funeral," I said, my voice breaking. "You barely looked at me. You acted like it meant nothing." "It meant everything," he said fiercely. "That's why I couldn't look at you. Because if I had, I wouldn't have been able to let you go. And I'd convinced myself that letting you go was the right thing to do, that you deserved better than a life built on obligation and fear. So instead, you traumatized us both by pretending it was nothing." I laughed bitterly. "That's not protection, Daniel. That's cowardice." He flinched like I'd struck him. "You're right. It was. And then I spent 9 months trying to find you to tell you the truth, to give you the choice I should have offered from the beginning. But you disappeared, and I thought..." His voice cracked. "I thought I'd lost my chance. That I'd handled everything so badly that you'd rather vanish than risk seeing me again." "I was scared," I admitted. "Not just of you or your world, but of how much I wanted to stay. How much I'd started to imagine a real life with you. When you handed me those papers without any emotion, it felt like confirmation that I'd been delusional, that what I felt wasn't real or wasn't reciprocated. It was reciprocated." He reached out hesitantly, his hand stopping just short of touching my cheek. "It is reciprocated. Every feeling you had, I had it 10 times worse because I knew it was my fault. I'd set up the arrangement. I'd insisted on the boundaries. And then I'd fallen for you anyway, and couldn't figure out how to tell you without making it seem like I was just trying to extend the contract." Hana stirred in my arms, making a small sound of complaint. I looked down at her, this tiny person we'd created together, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. 3 weeks, I said softly. You said 3 weeks to prove this wasn't just about Hana. To show me the truth. Yes. His hand was still hovering near my face, waiting for permission. I leaned into his touch, just slightly, feeling his palm warm against my cheek. Then use them. Because I'm tired of running, Daniel. I'm tired of being scared. But I'm also tired of not knowing where I stand, of feeling like I'm always trying to decode what you really mean versus what you're saying. No more codes, he promised, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. No more distance, just truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when your father disagrees with your choices, I challenged. His expression hardened. Especially then. I spent our entire marriage trying to keep you separate from my family business. I'm done with that. If we're going to try this, really try this, then you need to see all of it. The meetings, the decisions, the ugly reality of what I do and who I do it with. I don't want to be part of your criminal empire, I said firmly. I can't be. I'm an officer of the court. I have ethical obligations. I know, he interrupted, and I'm not asking you to compromise that. But I can't be with someone who doesn't understand the full scope of my world, who can't make an informed choice about whether they can live with what I am. It was honest, at least. Brutally so. And I appreciated that more than I could express. Okay, I said. Show me, all of it. Let me understand what I'd be choosing if I chose you. He smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You might hate me by the end of it. I might, I agreed, but at least it'll be an honest hatred based on truth, rather than assumptions and fear. Fair enough. He stood, leaning down to press a kiss to Hana's forehead. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'm taking you to a meeting. What kind of meeting? The kind where you'll understand exactly what cleaning up the Kim Jae-sung situation actually means. His expression was grim. And where you'll meet the people who work for me, who enforce my rules, who make the violence happen so I can keep my hands relatively clean. I swallowed hard. Okay. After he left, Keisha emerged from the bedroom where she'd been giving us privacy. Girl, did I just hear what I think I heard? You're actually considering staying with him? Getting back together? I'm considering understanding what I'm actually choosing, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? She sat beside me, her expression worried. Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to get pulled deeper into exactly the world you were trying to escape. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I'm finally going to see it clearly enough to make a real choice instead of just running away because I'm scared. Fear is a valid reason to run, Jess. So is love, I said quietly, surprising myself. And I think I might love him. Might have loved him during our marriage and been too afraid to admit it. And now I have a choice. Keep running and always wonder what could have been. Or stay and see if what we had was worth fighting for. Keisha sighed. You're going to do what you're going to do, I can see that. Just promise me one thing. What? Keep your eyes open, really open. Don't let love make you blind to danger. Because men like Daniel Park, they don't change, Jazz. They just get better at making you think they have. Her words haunted me as I finally put Hana down in her bassinet and tried to sleep. Because she was right. I was walking into danger with my eyes wide open, and there was every chance it would destroy me. But for the first time in 9 months, I wasn't running anymore. And that had to count for something. The conference room was on the 40th floor of a building Daniel owned in downtown LA, accessible only through a private elevator that required 3 separate security clearances. I'd left Hana with Keisha and a nurse Daniel trusted, my breasts already aching with the knowledge that I'd need to pump soon, my body a constant reminder of the vulnerability I was walking into this meeting with. Daniel's hand rested at the small of my back as we entered, a gesture that might have looked protective to anyone watching, but felt more like a claim of ownership. 6 men sat around the polished table, all Korean except for one older white man whose scarred knuckles suggested his role in the organization had nothing to do with accounting. They all stood when we entered, their eyes flickering between me and Daniel with expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly concealed disapproval. "Gentlemen," Daniel said in English, a courtesy I recognized was for my benefit. "This is Jasmine Reed, my former wife and the mother of my daughter. She'll be sitting in on this meeting and any others relating to the Kim Jae-sung situation." The room erupted in rapid Korean, multiple voices talking over each other. I caught enough to understand they were questioning Daniel's judgment, the wisdom of involving an outsider, the security risk of bringing an officer of the court into their operations. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. In English, or take it outside. The sudden silence was heavy with tension. Finally, the oldest man at the table, silver-haired and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my law school tuition, spoke. "With respect, this is not appropriate. She is not family. She is not sworn. She is—" "The mother of my heir," Daniel interrupted coldly, "which makes her more family than half the people in this room. And she stays." I watched the power dynamics shift, saw the moment when the older man decided that fighting Daniel on this wasn't worth whatever capital it would cost him. He bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, and the others followed suit. Daniel pulled out a chair for me directly to his right, the position of honor and trust, before taking his own seat at the head of the table. I sat carefully, conscious of my postpartum body and professional clothes I'd had delivered, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Status update," Daniel commanded, looking at the white man with scarred knuckles. "What did our friends at the FBI have to say?" "The raid is still scheduled for next Friday," the man replied. His voice had a Boston accent that seemed incongruous in this room full of Korean Americans. "They've got warrants for Kim's warehouse in San Pedro, his club in Koreatown, and 3 residential properties. Your information about the shipment coming in Thursday night sealed the deal." My stomach clenched. Daniel was actively cooperating with federal law enforcement to take down a rival. The legal and ethical implications of that made my lawyer brain short-circuit. "What about his people inside our organization?" Daniel asked. "Have we identified them all?" The silver-haired man pulled out a tablet, swiping to display photos on the screen mounted on the wall. 3 faces appeared, 2 Korean men I didn't recognize, and 1 woman who looked barely out of her 20s. Park Ji-won, our accountant, Min Seo-jun, warehouse supervisor, and the girl, Lee Ha-na. She works in the club managing the servers. The man's voice was matter-of-fact, discussing betrayal like it was a business inefficiency. "We've verified they've all been passing information to Kim's organization. Financial records, shipment schedules, personnel movements." "Verified how?" I asked, my voice cutting through the room. All eyes turned to me. "Phone records, surveillance footage, a few well-placed questions," the Boston man replied. The girl broke first, admitted Kim approached her 6 months ago, threatened her family if she didn't cooperate. Something in my chest twisted. So she's a victim, not a traitor. "She's both," Daniel said quietly. "And that's the problem. She gave Kim information that got 3 of my people hurt. One of them is still in the hospital. Intent matters less than consequences." "So what happens to them?" I pressed. "The 3 who've been passing information. What's the plan?" The silence that followed answered my question more clearly than words could have. I looked at Daniel, at the man I'd let touch me last night, whose daughter I was nursing, and saw the cold calculation in his eyes that reminded me exactly what he was capable of. "No," I said flatly. "You're not killing them. Not the girl, certainly. She was coerced." "This isn't a courtroom, Jasmine," the silver-haired man said with barely concealed condescension. "We don't have the luxury of rehabilitation programs and suspended sentences. Betrayal has consequences." Then fire them, I shot back. Blacklist them from working in your industry. Hell, threaten them within an inch of their lives, but you don't get to murder people and pretend it's justice. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once in warning. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than dismissive. What would you suggest? As someone who's actually practiced law, rather than just benefited from its convenient absence. The jab at the others in the room wasn't subtle, but I didn't waste time appreciating it. I was too busy calculating, trying to find a solution that didn't make me complicit in murder, while understanding that showing weakness here could cost Daniel respect. He couldn't afford to lose. The girl, Lee Hanna. She was coerced, which means she might be willing to testify against Kim if offered immunity. The FBI would love a witness who can detail his methods, his contacts, his operation from the inside. I looked directly at the Boston man. You have FBI contacts. Offer them a cooperating witness in exchange for witness protection for her and her family. And the others? Daniel asked. The accountant has records, right? Financial trails? Offer him the same deal. Testify, get immunity, disappear into witness protection. You're already working with the FBI to take down Kim. This just expands the case, gives them more ammunition. And the warehouse supervisor? The silver-haired man pressed. He has no special knowledge. He's not valuable as a witness. I met his gaze steadily. Then he's a message. You let him live, but you make sure everyone knows why. You make it clear that cooperating with the FBI to eliminate a threat to the community is acceptable, but working with Kim Jae-sung isn't. You don't kill him. You humiliate him. Strip him of position, respect, any future in this world. Make him a cautionary tale about what happens when you choose the wrong side. The room was silent as they processed this. I could see the calculation in their eyes, weighing my suggestions against their instinct for violent resolution. It could work, the Boston man said finally. The feds have been pushing for more witnesses anyway. And if we position it right, making it clear we're helping clean up our own community, it reinforces the narrative that this is about protecting Koreatown from Kim's influence, not about criminal enterprise. Daniel nodded slowly. Make the contacts. Offer the deals. If any of them refuse to cooperate with the FBI, we revisit this conversation. But Jasmine's right. Dead witnesses can't testify, and right now testimony is more valuable than revenge. The silver-haired man looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Daniel's expression stopped him. Instead, he bowed his head in acceptance, and I realized I'd just witnessed Daniel override his father's generation in favor of my suggestion. The implications of that made my head spin. The meeting continued for another hour, covering details of shipments and territory and negotiations with other organizations that made me increasingly uncomfortable. But Daniel had been right. Seeing it laid out clearly, understanding the scope and scale of what he managed, was different from the vague knowledge I'd lived with during our marriage. This wasn't a street gang or small-time operation. This was a multi-million-dollar enterprise spanning legitimate businesses and illegal activities, with connections to other Korean organizations across the country and back to South Korea itself. Daniel managed it with the skill of a Fortune 500 CEO and the ruthlessness of a general. And somehow, I'd become part of it by choosing to stay, by having his daughter, by sitting in this room and offering legal strategy to criminals. When the meeting finally ended, and we were alone in the elevator heading back down, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. That was a lot, Daniel finished. I know. But you needed to see it, to understand what you'd be choosing if you chose me. I just helped a criminal organization develop strategy for dealing with informants, I said, my voice hollow. I violated every ethical rule I've ever sworn to uphold. You suggested nonviolent solutions that will actually strengthen the case against a genuinely dangerous man, Daniel corrected. You saved 3 lives and probably gave the FBI enough ammunition to put Kim away for 20 years. That's not violation of ethics, Jasmine. That's using your training to minimize harm. That's rationalization, I shot back, and we both know it. There's no way to dress this up that makes it okay for an officer of the court to be sitting in on meetings about criminal enterprise. The elevator reached the ground floor, and we stepped out into the garage where Dimitri waited with the car. Daniel didn't speak again until we were sealed in the back seat, privacy screen raised. "You're right," he said quietly. "And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Being with me means compromise, Jasmine. It means living in shades of gray instead of the black and white of legal ethics. If you can't do that, I need to know now." I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man I'd married in a transaction, divorced in heartbreak, reconnected with through an accidental photo. The man who held our daughter with such tenderness, but ran an empire with cold calculation. The man who was offering me truth, even when it might cost him everything. "I don't know if I can do it long term," I admitted, "but I know I want to try. I know that walking away now, with Hannah, means always wondering what might have been. And I'm tired of running, Daniel. I'm so tired of being afraid." His hand found mine, lacing our fingers together. "Then don't run. Stay. Learn this world. Decide for yourself if you can live with it, with me. But do it with open eyes and honest assessment, not fear or obligation." "And if I decide I can't?" I had to ask. "If after 3 weeks or 3 months I realize this is destroying me, what happens then?" "Then you go," he said simply. "And I let you. I'll set you up somewhere safe, somewhere Kim and anyone else can't find you. I'll have visitation with Hannah on your terms. I'll write you the biggest child support check you've ever seen. And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I had something precious and lost it because of choices I made." The raw honesty of it made my throat tight. "You'd really let us go? Just like that?" "Just like that," he confirmed. "Because the only way this works is if you're choosing it freely. And if you're not, if you're staying out of fear or obligation, then I haven't really won anything worth having." We rode in silence the rest of the way back to the facility. My mind was churning with everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned, trying to reconcile my legal training with the reality of Daniel's world. Could I really build a life here, in the gray spaces between law and criminality? Could I raise Hannah in this world and still look at myself in the mirror? When we reached my suite, Keisha met us at the door with Hannah in her arms. "She just woke up and she's hungry. How'd it go?" "I'll tell you later," I said, taking my daughter and immediately feeling the fierce protective instinct that had become my constant companion. Looking at her perfect face, I understood with crystalline clarity what Daniel meant about choosing freely, because whatever I decided, Hannah would live with the consequences. Daniel lingered in the doorway. "I have another meeting in an hour, but I'll be back for dinner if you want to talk more." "Okay," I said. Then before I could overthink it, "Daniel, thank you for showing me the truth instead of trying to pretty it up." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "Always. No more secrets, remember?" After he left, I settled into the nursing chair with Hannah. Keisha sat across from me, her expression troubled. "You're staying, aren't you?" she said. Not a question. "I think so," I admitted. "At least for now. At least long enough to see if this can actually work. And if it can't, if you wake up one day and realize you've compromised yourself beyond recognition." I looked down at Hannah, at her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. "Then I leave. And I trust that Daniel meant what he said about letting us go. That's a hell of a gamble, Jazz." "So is walking away without knowing if we could have made this work," I countered. "I spent 9 months running. Maybe it's time to stop and face what I've been afraid of." "Which is?" "That I love him, I said quietly. Despite everything I know about what he does and who he is, that I fell for him during our marriage and never stopped, not even when I was telling myself I was running away from danger. I was really running from my own feelings because they terrified me more than his world ever did. Keisha was quiet for a long moment. You know I'll support you whatever you choose. But Jazz, be careful. Because men like Daniel Park, they pull you in, and before you know it, you can't tell where you end and their world begins. And by then, it's too late to get out clean. I know, I said, but I also know that I have to try. For Hannah, if not for me. She deserves to know her father, to have both her parents present and committed. And if that means I have to learn to live in the gray spaces, to compromise my ideals in small ways to protect her in big ways, maybe that's what love actually looks like. Or maybe that's how it starts, Keisha said softly. The small compromises that lead to bigger ones until you don't recognize yourself anymore. She might have been right, probably was right. But as I sat there nursing my daughter in a luxury suite paid for by criminal enterprise, protected by men who enforced Daniel's will through violence, I realized I'd already made my choice. I was staying, at least for now. At least long enough to see if the man I'd glimpsed in our marriage, the one who'd been tender despite his brutality, honest despite his criminal life, capable of love despite his dangerous world, was real. And if he wasn't, if this all fell apart and I had to run again, well, at least this time I'd know I'd tried. That I'd faced my fear instead of letting it dictate my choices. That had to be worth something. It had to be. The FBI raid happened on schedule. I watched the news coverage from Daniel's suite. He'd moved us there 3 days earlier, claiming the facility was needed for other purposes, but really just wanting us closer. The footage showed federal agents swarming Kim Jae-sung's warehouse, his club, his homes. By evening, Kim was in custody along with 16 of his associates. Daniel came home that night with exhaustion carved into his face and blood on his sleeve that he claimed wasn't his. I didn't ask whose it was. Some questions I was learning were better left unasked. It's done, he said, sinking onto the couch beside where I sat with Hannah. Kim's looking at 30 years minimum. His organization is scattered. The threat is neutralized. So we can leave? I asked. Go back to some version of normal? He was quiet for a long moment. Define normal. I laughed, the sound edged with exhaustion. Hannah was 3 weeks old. I was running on broken sleep and determination, and I'd just watched the news cover a raid I'd helped strategize. Normal felt like a concept from someone else's life. I don't know anymore, I admitted. Before, normal was my apartment, and my cases, and my routine. But that's gone now, isn't it? Even if Kim's in prison, even if the immediate threat is over, I can't go back to pretending I don't know what I know about your world. No, Daniel agreed. You can't. Which means we need to figure out what comes next. You said 3 weeks to prove this was more than just about Hannah, I reminded him. To show me the truth. It's been 3 weeks, Daniel. I've seen your meetings. I've met your people. I've watched you make decisions about violence and territory and power. So now what? He turned to face me fully, his expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. Now I ask if you can love me knowing all of that. If you can build a life with me despite what I am and what I do. Can you promise it won't destroy me? I countered. Can you promise that 5 years from now I won't look in the mirror and hate what I've become? No, he said honestly. I can't promise that any more than you can promise you won't leave. But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to protect you from the worst of it. To keep the violence and the ugliness away from you and Hannah as much as possible. But not completely, I said. Because that's what failed last time, right? The distance, the separation. You trying to protect me by keeping me in the dark. Right. He reached for my hand. This time, if we do this, it's as partners. You'll know what I'm doing even if you're not directly involved. You'll have the truth even when it's uncomfortable. And in exchange, I use my legal training to help you stay on the right side of the law as much as possible. I finished. To find legitimate solutions before resorting to illegal ones. To be the voice of ethics even when it's inconvenient. Exactly. His thumb traced circles on my palm. I'm not asking you to become a criminal, Jasmine. I'm asking you to be my conscience, to keep me honest in a world that doesn't reward honesty. It was a heavy burden, an impossible one maybe, but sitting there with Hannah sleeping against my chest and Daniel's hand warm in mine, I realized I wanted to try. Not because I'd suddenly become comfortable with his world, but because I'd seen glimpses of who he could be with the right influence, who we could be together. Okay, I said quietly. But I have conditions. He smiled slightly. Of course you do. First, we remarry. Legally, properly, with a prenup that protects both of us. I'm not going to be your common law wife or permanent girlfriend. If we're doing this, we do it right. Agreed. Second, I go back to work. Not at the public defender's office. That ship has sailed. But I practice law somehow. Pro bono work, maybe, or consulting with immigrant advocacy groups. Something that lets me use my training for good. I'll fund whatever practice you want to set up, Daniel said immediately. Staff, office space, operating budget. Consider it done. Third, I continued, Hannah grows up with both sides of her heritage, Korean language, traditions, culture from your family, but also Black American traditions from mine. She doesn't lose either half of who she is because we're trying to protect her. Agreed. My mother will be thrilled. She's already planning the doljanchi. I didn't know what that was, but I made a mental note to ask later. And fourth, most important, the first time you lie to me, the first time you shut me out or try to protect me by keeping me in the dark, I leave. No second chances, no explanations. One lie, and we're done. His expression grew serious. That's harsh. That's necessary, I corrected. Because the only way this works is total honesty, even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful. I can live with you being a criminal, Daniel. I can't live with you being a liar. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, total honesty. No lies, no omissions, no protection through ignorance. He raised my hand to his lips. I can do that. Then we have a deal. I looked down at Hannah. When do you want to do this? The remarriage? As soon as you're ready. Next week, next month, whenever you say. I thought about the spectacle our first wedding had been. His grandmother crying, my mother confused but supportive. Neither of us really present because we were too busy performing. This time would be different. This time would be real. 3 months, I decided. Give me time to recover from childbirth, to figure out how to be a mother. Let Hannah get a little older so she can actually be part of it, and give both of us time to make sure this is what we really want. 3 months, Daniel agreed. But Jasmine? I already know this is what I want. I've known since the middle of our first marriage when I realized I was counting the days until the contract ended with dread instead of relief. Something warm bloomed in my chest. When did you know? Specifically. He smiled at the memory. Remember the night you fell asleep on the couch reading case files, about 6 months in? I came home late, and you were curled up with legal briefs scattered everywhere, wearing my law school sweatshirt because you said it was comfortable. I did remember that. I'd been so embarrassed when I woke up and he was covering me with a blanket. I stood there watching you sleep, he continued, and I thought, this is what I want. Not the arrangement, not the contract. Just this. Coming home to you. Covering you with a blanket. Building something real. his voice roughened. And then I panicked because that wasn't the deal, and I convinced myself the distance was protecting you, when really I was protecting myself from inevitable heartbreak. "You're an idiot," I said, but without heat. "Agreed. But I'm your idiot if you'll have me." "On one condition," I said, surprising myself. "Another one?" "The last one, I promise." I adjusted Hannah in my arms. "I want to meet your mother. Really meet her, not just a formal introduction. I want her to teach me about Korean traditions, about your family, about how to raise Hannah with that part of her heritage. And I want you to meet my mother properly. Come to her house, eat her cooking, learn about my side of Hannah's family." Daniel blinked. "You want to? Blend our families?" "Hannah deserves to know both sides," I said. "And so do we. We spent our first marriage keeping things separate, keeping me apart from your world. This time we integrate. Your family becomes mine becomes yours, and Hannah grows up knowing she comes from both." "My mother will cry," Daniel warned. "Happy tears, but still. She's been waiting for me to settle down properly for years." "My mother will probably interrogate you about your intentions and your business," I countered. "Fair warning, she's not easily impressed by money or power." "Good," Daniel said. "She shouldn't be, not when it comes to her daughter's happiness." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, Hannah sleeping between us, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I felt the weight of the decision I'd made settling over me. Not oppressive, but significant. I was choosing this life, this man, this future, with open eyes and full knowledge of what it meant. "Daniel," I said quietly. "I love you. I think I loved you during our marriage and was too scared to say it. Too afraid you'd think I was trying to renegotiate the contract, or that you'd pity me for falling for something that was supposed to be transactional." I looked at him. "But I'm not scared anymore. Or maybe I'm still terrified, but I'm saying it anyway because you deserve to know the truth." His eyes were suspiciously bright. "Say it again." "I love you," I repeated, the words easier the second time. "Even though you're a criminal. Even though your world is violent and dangerous and everything I was trained to fight against. I love you." "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "I've loved you since that night with the sweatshirt, maybe even before. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that your trust isn't misplaced, that choosing me was the right decision." "Don't make promises you can't keep," I warned. "I'm not," he said seriously. "I'm making a promise I'll die trying to keep. There's a difference." Before I could respond, Hannah woke with a cry that rapidly escalated to full-throated wailing. I laughed, standing to walk her around the room, feeling my body protest the movement but pushing through it. "Welcome to our new normal," I said to Daniel over Hannah's cries. Late-night feedings, no sleep, and profound life decisions made while covered in spit-up. He stood, coming over to take Hannah from me. "I'll change her. You get ready to feed her. We're a team now, remember?" I watched him carry our daughter to the changing table he'd had installed in the corner of the suite, his large hands gentle and careful as he dealt with her diaper. This man who commanded an empire with brutal efficiency, who made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, was focused entirely on making sure his daughter was clean and comfortable. "Yeah," I said softly. "We're a team." 3 months later, we remarried in a small ceremony in his mother's garden. Hannah, now chubby and alert, wore a tiny hanbok that Daniel's mother had commissioned, her dark eyes wide as she looked around at the unfamiliar faces. My mother sat in the front row next to Daniel's mother, the two women who'd been strangers at our first wedding now chatting like old friends despite the language barrier. Keisha stood as my maid of honor, still skeptical, but grudgingly accepting that I'd made my choice with open eyes. Daniel's cousin stood as his best man, having flown in from Seoul for the occasion. The ceremony was bilingual, Korean and English woven together, and when the officiant asked if I took Daniel to be my husband, I didn't hesitate. "I do," I said clearly. Again. For real this time. Daniel's smile was radiant. "For real this time," he echoed when it was his turn. We exchanged rings, not the ones from our first marriage, but new ones inscribed with the date and "no more distance" in both English and Korean. When he kissed me, it felt like a promise and a beginning. At the reception, I watched Hana being passed between her grandmothers, both women cooing at her in their respective languages. I watched Daniel laughing with my uncle, explaining Korean drinking games with patient humor. I watched two worlds blending in a way I'd once thought impossible. "Any regrets?" Keisha asked, appearing at my elbow with champagne. I took the glass. I could finally drink again after months of pregnancy and nursing, and considered the question honestly. Probably. Ask me in 5 years, and I'll give you a detailed list. But not now. Not now, I confirmed. Now I'm too busy being terrified and hopeful and in love to have space for regrets. "Good enough," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "Just remember, when the regrets do come, I'm still here, still ready to help you run if you need to." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "And I love you for it." Daniel appeared then, Hana in his arms, his tie already loosened from the heat. "Your daughter wants her mother," he said, passing her over, "and your husband wants a dance." I settled Hana against my shoulder, swaying to the music that had started playing. Multitasking, the cornerstone of any good marriage. He laughed, pulling us both close and moving in a slow circle. "This is it, you know. This is what I imagined that night with the sweatshirt, coming home to you, building something real, having a family." "It's better than I imagined," I admitted. "Scarier, more complicated, but better." "Just wait until she starts talking," Daniel said, looking at Hana with such tenderness it made my chest ache. "Then it gets really scary." "We'll figure it out," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Together, as a team." "As a team," he agreed, and kissed me again as our families applauded, and Hana made a sound of complaint at being squished between us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to safe or simple or any of the things I'd once imagined for my life. But it was ours, built on truth and compromise and love that had survived transaction, separation, and 9 months of running. And for now, that was enough.